Question: does the use of drugs for treatment of psychological conditions, such as psychosis, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, etc., do these drugs have a negative impact on a person's spiritual growth? Meaning, do they prevent a person from truly resolving one's psychological problems by preventing the symptoms from coming back again? How to overcome or resolve one's psychological conditions without the use of drugs, if that's possible? And is it necessary to take drugs to prevent psychological symptoms or recover from one's psychological problems? What can a person with psychological conditions do to recover from this or that psychological illness? Well, first of all, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or medical doctor, so I cannot give you medical advice and tell you what to do or not to do. What I would say here is that if you feel that you have psychological problems that are very severe, such as, psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, suicidal, whatever it may be. If you have those kind of symptoms, you need to seek the help of a qualified professional, and you need to follow their advice and see how that helps you. It doesn't do you any good to go to a psychiatrist and he suggests something, you say, oh no, I saw a guy on the internet who said this is going to impede my spiritual growth. I mean, that's not what I in any way recommend. So what I can only give advice about here is if you have psychological issues that are not so severe that you feel you have an acute problem that requires you to get the help of a professional. So psychological problems that you might be able to deal with on your own. And in that case, I would say that I think in general, if you want to resolve psychological issues, you don't want to use drugs. In general, I would say don't use any kind of drugs unless you feel it's absolutely necessary. Because there is, of course, a tendency in the medical profession to overprescribe any kind of drug. Now, again, I'm not an expert. I don't know any of these drugs. I haven't used them personally. But my feeling is that anytime you use a drug that works on the brain, it can potentially hinder your spiritual growth. I mean, that's basically what I'm trying to answer here, is not what you in general should do about psychological issues, but do these drugs have a negative impact on a person's spiritual growth? And let's say you have a brain tumor, and you go to the doctor and he prescribes painkillers. You have a more severe pain, he prescribes more advanced painkillers. But one day the brain tumor kills you. So it's the same thing with psychological issues. Certainly there are drugs that mask the symptoms. And that can be necessary in very severe cases. I'm not saying it isn't. But as I said, if it's not a severe case, masking the symptom is of course going to not only impede your spiritual growth, but also impede your psychological growth, because ideally with psychology, it's a matter of resolving the issues by you coming to see something in your psychology and resolving it. That's what traditional talk therapy and many alternative forms of therapy are all about. So what I can say here is that I'm of course a spiritual person, so I have a spiritual perspective. And from a spiritual perspective, you don't agree with the materialistic worldview that any kind of condition in the psychology is caused by the brain. We, as a spiritual person, you obviously see that the mind is more than the brain, is independent of the brain. So therefore, most psychological issues take place in the mind, they are conditions in the mind, and it can only be resolved in the mind. Now I'm saying most because obviously the brain is a very, very complex organism, mechanism, whatever you want to call it. Very, very complex. So obviously the brain can have conditions that influence your psychological well-being. I mean, these very severe things, bipolar, schizophrenia, psychosis, I think they often have a brain component. So that's why, again, it can be valuable enough to use the kind of drugs in acute situations. But in the long run, what's going to help you grow psychologically and spiritually is that you look at issues, you come to see that there's a mechanism in your psychology that causes you to react a certain way, and then you consciously resolve that. Then you are free of that mechanism. And this has nothing to do with the brain in most cases. These are conditions created in the mind, and they can only be resolved in the mind. There are many psychologists that will agree with this, or at least would agree with it if they didn't have to say it out publicly where they could be harassed by their materialistic colleagues. But there are many psychologists that are beginning to become aware that there has been a tendency to overuse drugs, and it doesn't actually help people in the long run. So to me, there is, no substitute for therapy of various kinds. So, for example, the person is asking how to overcome or resolve one's psychological conditions without the use of drugs, if that's possible. Well, of course it's possible. Right? It's only within the last few decades that we've had these drugs, but before that there were various kind of therapies that actually help people, and they're still there. Now there are even more alternative therapies that help people. So I would say use whatever therapies are available to you, and don't be afraid to look at some alternative ones like EMDR, regression therapy, hypnotherapy, other forms of therapy. I don't know all of them out there, but you can find something that should resonate with you, and then attempt to use it and see what it does for you. I have, of course, given teachings on this website, on this video YouTube channel, and on my websites, that we have these subconscious selves in our subconscious mind that we can come to see the illusion behind them and resolve the self and let it go. It's just my way of describing what has been done by psychologists for 100 years or more. So it is a matter of seeing something in your psychology, seeing why you have a certain reactionary pattern, seeing that there is some belief about it, and that the belief is an illusion. Once you see that the belief is an illusion, you can let it go. You can let the self go. Then if the person asks, is it necessary to take drugs to prevent psychological symptoms or recover from one's psychological problems? Well, again, that would depend on how severe the problems are. It can be necessary to get a reprieve if the symptoms are so severe that you are in danger of becoming self-destructive. But it's clear that they dull the mind, and the more dull the mind is, the harder it's going to be to resolve things by seeing them. So it's the same as you can see that if a person gets really, really drunk, you can't do therapy with a person who's drunk, right, or who's affected by illegal drugs, recreational drugs, because you can't work with them. So the same thing with these drugs that mask the psychological symptoms. I mean, you can't do talk therapy, for example, with a person who is severely affected by these drugs and can't really clearly see what's going on in their mind. So what can a person with psychological conditions do to recover from this or that illness? Well, again, if it's severe, you definitely need professional help, and you may need to use drugs if it's severe conditions, but otherwise find some kind of therapy that's available to you in your local area that you can afford. Work with that. As an alternative, use the teachings I have given about these subconscious selves, about invoking light from the Ascended Masters, and see how that helps you. And look for whatever kind of therapies are available to you. And I mean, the way I would look at it is I would attack the problem from any angle. Study books about psychology, find books about similar symptoms you have, see what other people have done, look on the internet and see what people have done with the same issue. There's so much material available today that almost any psychological problem, I think you can find people who have dealt with a problem you're dealing with and see what has helped them and then try that out. Really, I'm not saying that there aren't people who have psychological issues as a result of brain conditions, brain damage, or whatever it may be. I'm not saying that that isn't the case. But for most people, the psychological illnesses are psychological, meaning they can be resolved. Because you think about this. What is the human psyche? Now, if you take the materialistic approach, yes, then your human psyche is set in stone, because if you have a certain genetic inheritance, if you have a certain brain conditions, the only way to deal with that is to change those physical conditions. But when you take a spiritual outlook, you realize that the psyche, nothing is set in stone. Everything is the result of decisions you have made. Any psychological condition you have is a result of decisions you have made. Now, the difficulty is that you often didn't make those decisions in this lifetime. If you really want to effectively resolve psychology, you have to consider reincarnation, and you have to look back and say, but listen, when I look at history, I could have been in a war in a past lifetime. I could have been in the Second World War, for example, either as a soldier, as a civilian, see my city be killed and destroyed. You could have all kinds of traumas that you were exposed to in past lifetimes that you carry with you into this lifetime. But what I'm saying is that once you begin to recognize this, you realize that any situation you encounter, no matter how traumatic it is, what it actually does is it causes you to make a decision that creates one of these subconscious selves. And this is like a program that's lying dormant in your subconscious mind. And in certain situations, it can be triggered. And but it started with an outer situation that you didn't create. It wasn't your fault. But you reacted to it by making a decision. And it can be many different decisions. It's many individual decisions. But what I'm saying is, if you're using various forms of therapy, or if you increase your knowledge about psychological conditions, you can come to a point where you actually make contact with that decision. I've done this many times myself. I know many people who have done it. So you can come to make contact with a decision you made in a past life. You can come to see. You don't necessarily see the specifics of the outer situation, but you see the dynamic of the decision you made. And then you see that, first of all, it wasn't the only decision that could have been made, but it was the decision you made in the situation. And you can see how the situation is limiting you. And you can see how, when you look at it from different angles, you can come to see it was based on an illusion. And it was just a decision you made. And when you see this, you can resolve it. You can resolve the decision, you can resolve the self. That's like a computer program. Just to give you a concrete example that I've used before is that I discovered at one point that I had a subconscious self that really wanted other people to see me as a good person. And this went back to past lives where I had been in a situation where I had been accused of having done something wrong and done something that caused disastrous consequences for other people. And I made a decision that the worst thing that I could possibly do was to hurt other people's feelings. I mean, to this self, hurting other people's feelings was worse than killing somebody. It was the worst thing I could possibly do, hurt other people's feelings. And so I created this self. You can't hurt other people's feelings. I created another self that said, in order to avoid hurting other people's feelings, they always have to see you as a good person. And all of a sudden I was trapped in this straitjacket of always having to try to adapt to other people so I wouldn't hurt their feelings and so they would see me as a good person. And it really limited me in so many ways. I can see that when I look back to my childhood, my youth. And it was an enormous relief to come to see that it was just a decision I made. It wasn't the only decision. It was limiting me. And it was really based on an illusion because, first of all, you can never control how other people look at you, right? Some people are not going to like you no matter what you do. And that was also my experience because I encountered these people where I tried not to hurt their feelings, but no matter what I did, it hurt their feelings. Or at least they accused me of hurting their feelings. And so I came to this just observation that you can't please everybody, and some people you can't please, right? It's like Abraham Lincoln said, you know, you can please all of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time, but there are some people you can't please at all. So it's just it was an impossible quest for me, and it was only when I saw this that I could let go of that self and be free of it, so that now I can be myself. And I'm not deliberately trying to hurt other people's feelings, obviously, but I'm just allowing myself to be who I am. And if other people choose to, that this hurts their feelings, well, I set them free to make that decision, because they obviously have a right to make that decision. And before, I was trying to interfere with their free will so that I wouldn't feel bad about myself. And that's what keeps you trapped in this never-ending game. So anyway, I've given quite a few talks about this. So if you're interested in the topic, look up those videos I have in my, I have several playlists about it. I have the Avatar Psychology playlist, I have some of my breakthrough videos, and also I have a section on Question Kim about psychology that can help you.